Welcome, everyone, to another one of our summer chapels at Dallas Seminary, and thank you for joining us today. Our speaker today is Dr. Larry Dinkins. He finished his THM at DTS in 1979 and then went with his wife, Paula, to Thailand through OMF International and began a church planting ministry with leprosy patients. In 1987, the Dinkins transitioned into a Bible teaching ministry at the Bangkok Bible College. In 1995, Larry finished classwork for a PhD at Biola University, allowing him to return to Thailand to start a TEE program in North Thailand. Larry acted as a founding director of the newly formed Chiang Mai Theological Seminary in 2000, before the family evacuated Thailand in 2002 due to a diagnosis of cancer in Paula's bone marrow. After 9 years of treatment, Paula's struggle with cancer ended, and she went into the Lord's presence. In 2012, Larry returned to Thailand to resume his ministry of Bible teaching. For the last 9 months, Dr. Dinkins has acted as the missionary in residence and was recently approved as an adjunct professor here at DTS. Larry has 4 children and 8 grandchildren.
For the last 9 months, I've been living in Washington Hall here at Dallas Theological Seminary, and there's about 100 young people there. My neighbor is named Jabba from Ghana, and I promised him that I would take him to a Thai restaurant. And so, as we're sitting down, the owner of that restaurant came out and began to banter with me in the Thai language. But then she went into the kitchen. And when she came out, her countenance had changed. And as you know, probably in the Eskimo languages, they got 50 words for snow. Well, in the Thai language, they have probably 12 different phrases for smile. And she was not smiling. And as she spoke with me, she said, "Rataban Sanghai Rao Pid Lao," which means the government has told me I have to close my restaurant. Now, that was on March 19th. This is May 20th. And so we have seen 2 months of this pandemic, the COVID-19, which has impacted all of us. And as I've reflected on that, I've seen it hit, as you have, all the segments of society. Economically, 30 million people without a job. We've got 14% unemployment. Educators like myself, professors, school teachers, all the way from kindergarten up to graduate school. And families. I have 4 children, and I've seen how it's impacted my kids' families. I think of businesses. I think also of the first responders, the doctors and the nurses. But the group that's probably on our TV screens the most is the most vulnerable. Now, those would be people who often have medical issues already. There's probably 20% in that category. And then there's 80% that are at risk 65 years and older. My mother is 91 years old, and in her nursing home, they have had a death. And my understanding is 1/3 of deaths have occurred in those nursing homes. So no one in my family has been able to visit her in that apartment for about 2 months. And I am over 65 myself, so I'm in that risk category as well. As I was thinking about these things, I was pushed back to the time where I worked in Thailand as a church planner, and the core group that I worked with were called lepers. They were leprosy patients. And I have not seen any group before or since that was at risk, so vulnerable, defenseless, unprotected as those lepers. And then, of course, when I look in the Bible, I see God's concern for lepers. Think of Naaman in the Old Testament. And then, of course, Jesus, who cleansed many lepers during his ministry. And so the heart of God was shown very clearly with that group of lepers. But then as I studied a little more in depth, I found that there was a cluster of 3 segments in Jewish society that were the most weak, the most unprotected, the most defenseless. And that group are the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. And so I think it'd be very suitable during this time of COVID-19 that we would check our attitudes and our concern for those who are most vulnerable around us. The cluster of those three groups is found 9 different passages in the Old Testament. And probably the key passage would be from Psalm 146 and verse 9. That verse says, "The Lord protects the strangers, upholds the fatherless and the widow, and he thwarts the way of the wicked." And what I'd like to do is to look at each of these groups in turn, starting with the stranger, the alien, the foreigner. The reason why God directed the Jewish people to have a concern for the sojourner or for that alien, I think can be found in Exodus 22:21. "You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt." You see, the Jews were oppressed, they were persecuted, and through that whole 400-year period down in Egypt, they understood what it was like to be a stranger in a strange land. I personally have been called for the last 40 years in Thailand a phalang, which means foreigner. And the phrase that I have never gotten used to is satsana phalang, which means propagator of a foreign religion. Well, in the New Testament, the Apostle Peter also addressed a group of dispersed believers that were strangers, and they were aliens as well. And you'll find that in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. It says, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul." You know, our family, over the 32 years that I was married, understood what it was like to be an alien, a stranger, a foreigner, a sojourner, an exile. Because during those 32 years, our family lived in 25 houses. And those were scattered about 11 cities and 3 different countries. And in a few weeks, my heart is to return to Thailand. And when I return, I still don't know where I'm going to stay. One surprising statistic that I found was that the United States of America has received more immigrants than any other nation on earth. We have over 40 million that have been born in a different country and have come here. For the last 9 months, I've been working with Lao churches. And one particular church, I would say most all of them were refugees from Laos to the States. And during those 9 months, I got a very good appreciation for the obstacles, the problems, difficulties of being an immigrant to this country. And yet at the same time, I saw unusual opportunities for ministry with these groups. In the previous book from 1 Peter, in the book of James, it actually lists the next 2 categories. And in the book of James, we'll find in chapter 1 and verse 27, it mentions 2 of those groups. Religion that is pure and undefiled, this is chapter 1, verse 27, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. There were actually about 30 different passages that talk about being an orphan or fatherless. In the United States, we have, as I understand it, about 326 million people. And out of that population, there are 400,000 that are in foster care. That's kind of the category that we designate. But in Thailand, where I have lived for well over 30 years, we have 70 million population with 1 million orphans. Now, that doesn't mean that both of the parents are necessarily dead, but these are children that are separated from their families. In the town that I live in, Chiang Mai, in the outskirts, there are 75 orphanages. And I have had the privilege of working in one called Brianna House. I remember when it first started up, they had 44 young girls. My wife was involved with an orphanage for HIV children. and she happened to be there on the opening day. They brought in a baby girl, newborn, and my wife picked up this baby and brought the baby home. And she said, "I would like to keep this child." Well, I need to tell you, I had slept very well for 10 years, and I wasn't real excited about that plan. And yet we kept little Gracie Joy for almost a year and fostered her. During that time, it was difficult for me because my wife wanted to adopt. We already had 4. We'd go to a prayer meeting with these OMF older ladies, and when they would pray, they would say, "God, would you change the hardened heart of this Larry Dinkins, soften it so he will receive Gracie Joy into his family?" And I always felt that that wasn't a fair way to pray. The good aspect of this story is that a couple with younger children actually received Gracie Joy into their family. So I do have appreciation for the fatherless, and I believe that number is going to go up in the future, and our sensitivity to orphans and fatherless needs to be increased. The last group would be widows, and there are 81 occurrences of that word in the scriptures. I would add the word widower because for the last 9 years, I have had to check in all the forms I have filled out, widower. That is true because in 2002, my wife contracted multiple myeloma cancer, a bone cancer. Then for the next 9 years, she went through chemo treatments, she went through stem cell replacements. And anytime that she got a fever, we wouldn't just give her an aspirin, we would have to take her to ER. So during that time, I truly understood what it was like to have low immunity, to be at risk, and very much like many people in our society today with COVID-19. Then after a 9-year battle, my sweet wife Paula was taken to glory. And then not even a year after that, my father passed away, which meant that myself and my mom were both in that category of widow. My understanding is there are 15 million widowers in this country at this time. And I have joined a support group called Grief Share. I've actually gone through it twice, and I'm hoping to take it back to the country of Thailand when I return. And I would highly encourage you to look into this because it's specifically for those who have lost a spouse or lost someone that was very close to them. So we have treated these 3 groups, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. And I had a very good exposure to many of these groups through a ministry here on campus. People ask me, what was the most significant thing for me during my time as a missionary in residence at DTS? Well, I was involved with lots of activities, lots of classes, but I would say that the most gratifying was my work with the Evangelism Fellowship. I was helping lead a group of students that went out weekly in evangelism. First of all, to the SMU campus, and then just around the corner to a place called Roseland, which is a housing project. And then just about 2 blocks away, a place called Dickinson Place, which is for retirees. And in that building, there are many widows. I was always impressed with the students who were stretching themselves, who were getting out of their comfort zone to do cold turkey evangelism and to build bridges into the lives of these people. I actually had to pinch myself when I first saw the building of the retirement center just 2 blocks away, because 40 years ago, I had actually visited that same building, and I visited a widow named Naomi Blewett. Now, don't ask me how I can remember her name, but I visited her on a regular basis. Over this last period of time, I have visited a Spanish lady who is very much alone, and I was thrilled when we were able to give her a study Bible in Spanish. So each week I've been able to see these students go out into these various contexts and really stretch themselves. I asked my roommate, this is amazing, but I had a roommate that was 40 years younger than me, and I asked him, "Do you ever stretch yourself?" And he said, "Oh, I'm very much stretched. I'm teaching elementary boys in a mega church here in North Dallas." I said, are you sure that stretches you? He said, oh, yes. If you've ever worked with elementary boys, you'll know how stretching that can be. And I told him, listen, I have raised 3 boys. I know how stretching that can be. But I also challenged him and said, you know, it'd be very good while you're here to actually stretch yourself into people that are very different than yourself, to people that maybe speak a different language, different context than your own, people that maybe are defenseless, people that are weak, unprotected. Because when I was at Dallas Seminary during my 4 years, I didn't go to Sunday school. I had an elder in my church that would take me into the poor community and to a jail. And I can say that that was one of the best training grounds for the 40 years that I have worked as a missionary in overseas missionary fellowship. So as we finish this kind of devotional time this morning, I'm thinking of my 9 months back at DTS. And I see students that are constantly stretching themselves academically, and I stretched myself academically when I was here, and I'm sure that's a very much part and parcel of being at a seminary. It's very important. But I also think about the Apostle Paul. He was someone that had the head of a scholar and the heart of an evangelist. And so my prayer is, as I leave this campus, is that all of us would maintain the head of a scholar, but that we would also have the heart of an evangelist, have a heart of concern, a heart of compassion for those that are most vulnerable around us. And at least in the Bible and today, we have 3 groups: the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. So as I leave you, I just want to give you a Thai why. This is the way we greet and we also say goodbye. And I want to just thank you for each of you participating in our summer chapels. I pray that you'll have a great summer and that God will indeed bless you and guide you through this next period of time.